blood. Not red water, not river mud churned up by a flood. Blood. Warm, thick, clotting in the green reeds where just the day before children had been swimming. It started at the edge of the great river that fed all of Egypt. A fisherman stooped to fill his jar the way he had every morning of his life. And what came up was not water. It was dark, and it smelled like a battlefield. By midday the fish were turning their white bellies to the sun. By evening the stench had crawled into every kitchen, every temple, every palace hall in the land. And there was nothing in all of Egypt left to drink. Put yourself there for a moment. You wake up thirsty, the way you do every morning, and you walk to the water jar in the corner of your house, and it is full of blood. You run to the canal, blood. You dig in the wet sand of the riverbank, the way the Egyptians did that week just to find something to drink, and the water that seeps up is pink, then red. You watch your children cry because they are thirsty, and there is nothing clean to give them. For 7 days, the single thing your entire civilization was built around, the river, the giver of all life, has become the one thing you cannot touch. That is the first blow, and it is the gentlest of the 10. Now here's the part nobody tells you about that first morning. That river had a name. The Egyptians called it the gift of Hapi, the god of the Nile, the god who made the harvest rise, and the cattle fat, and the children strong. To strike that river was not weather. It was not bad luck. It was a declaration of war against a god, and it was only the first. But there is something darker buried under the surface of that water, and you need to understand it before we go a single step further. That same river, that sacred life-giving Nile, was a graveyard. Years before any of this, the most powerful man in the world had stood on a balcony over that river and given an order. Throw every Hebrew baby boy into the Nile. Drown them. Let the great river of Egypt swallow the sons of the slaves. And it had. For years, that beautiful water had carried the bodies of murdered children out to the sea while the temples sang and the priests gave thanks to Hapi for his kindness. So when God reached down and turned that river to blood, he was not being cruel. He was holding up a mirror. He was saying to a kingdom built on dead children, "You wanted this river full of Hebrew blood. Look at it now." This is not a story about 10 random disasters. This is not a story about ancient weather patterns and bad harvests. This is not a story about one stubborn king having a very long, very bad month. This is the story of a single, deliberate war, fought one blow at a time, marching in perfect order toward one terrible night and one small wooden door between the God of a nation of slaves and every god the most powerful empire on earth had ever worshipped. The Hebrew word for what fell on Egypt is not accident. It is nega, a blow, a strike, the kind of word you use for a fist landing on a face. 10 of them, each one aimed, each one chosen, each one louder than the one before. And there is one more thing I need you to hold in your mind from the very beginning, because everything turns on it at the end. Somewhere in this story, before it is over, there will be another kind of blood. Not blood poured out to judge a guilty nation, but blood smeared by a trembling hand in the dark on wood. Blood that will not bring death through a door, but hold it back. Remember that. We will get there. But not yet. For now, you are standing on the bank of a river that is turned to blood. The most powerful empire in the world has just lost its water, and a shepherd with a stick is standing in front of the throne, telling Pharaoh that all of this, could have been avoided. Let me take you back to how a slave ended up giving orders to a god king. Because to understand the 10 blows, you have to understand the man who refused to feel a single one of them until the 10th. Egypt in those days was not just powerful, Egypt was the world. While most of the earth was scattered tribes and mud villages, Egypt was building monuments so vast we still cannot fully explain them. Running an economy that fed nations, keeping records, training armies, mapping the stars. And at the very top of it all sat one man the people did not call a king. They called him a god. Pharaoh was, in their religion, the living son of the sun. The gods spoke through him. The harvest rose because of him. To disobey Pharaoh was not treason, it was blasphemy. And underneath all that glory was a workforce of slaves. Hundreds of thousands of them. The descendants of a Hebrew man named Jacob, who had come to Egypt generations earlier to escape a famine, welcomed as honored guests, and slowly, over the years, turned into property. They made the bricks. They built the cities. They died young, and they were not mourned. Live inside that for a moment, because the whole story is told from the bottom looking up, not from the throne looking down. Imagine you are one of them. You wake before the sun to the sound of the overseer's voice. Your back already aches from yesterday. You spend the daylight bent over wet clay and straw, your hands cracked and bleeding, building monuments to a king who thinks you are livestock. You watch your father grow old at 35. You bury friends who simply collapsed in the field and were not worth stopping the work over. And the worst part is not the labor. The worst part is that you have prayed for years to a God your grandfather told you about, and the sky has been silent your entire life. 400 years of silence. That is the world this story walks into. Not a fairy tale. A people who had almost stopped believing anyone was listening. Then they started multiplying fast. And a Pharaoh who did not remember why they were there looked at all those Hebrew children and felt fear. The cold fear of a powerful man who suddenly senses the people at the bottom outnumber the people at the top. So he gave the order, every Hebrew boy, the moment he is born, is to be killed. And here is where you meet the first heroes of this story. And they are not who you would expect. Their names were Shiphrah and Puah, 2 midwives. 2 women whose entire job was to stand at the edge of life and pull babies into the world. Pharaoh, the living god, the most powerful man alive, summoned these 2 ordinary women and commanded them to become executioners. Kill the boys as they are born. Tell the mothers it was a stillbirth. No one will ever know. And they said no. Think about that. The God King of the greatest empire on earth gives a direct order, backed by the full power of the state, and 2 midwives, who could be killed for so much as a sideways glance, simply refuse. The book of Exodus says they refused because they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. And it does something almost shocking. It records their names Shiphrah, Puah, 2 slave women. Their names are written down and remembered for 3,000 years, while the all-powerful Pharaoh who gave the order is so unimportant to God that the text does not even bother to tell us which Pharaoh he was. Pay attention to that because it is the whole story in miniature. In Egypt, the king is a god, and the slaves are nameless. In God's account of the same events, the slaves have names, and the king is a footnote. When the midwives failed him, Pharaoh widened the kill order to the whole nation. Throw the boys in the river. And into that exact moment, one Hebrew mother named Jochebed gave birth to a son she could not bear to lose. She hid him for 3 months. And when she could hide him no longer, she did something that sounds like surrender and was actually defiance. She obeyed the letter of Pharaoh's law and shattered its spirit. She put her baby in the river, sealed inside a little waterproof basket, floating, alive, and his sister Miriam stood in the reeds and watched to see what would happen. What happened was that Pharaoh's own daughter found the basket, opened it, looked at the crying Hebrew boy, and decided to raise him as her own. Inside the palace, on the dime of the very kingdom trying to wipe his people out, she named him Moses, and that is the man. That baby, pulled from the river of death, raised in the house of the enemy, exiled 40 years in a desert after killing a man, who is now standing in front of Pharaoh's throne with a shepherd's staff, saying 4 words that no one had ever dared say to a living God. Let my people go. Pharaoh laughed. Of course he laughed. Who was this Hebrew nobody, and who was this God he claimed to speak for? Pharaoh said it out loud. Who is the Lord that I should obey him? I do not know the Lord. And he made the slaves work harder out of spite. So God answered the question. Pharaoh wanted to know who the Lord was. He was about to find out 10 times. And this is where it gets remarkable, because the blows do not come at random. They come in a pattern so precise that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The first blow, as you already know, fell on the river. Water to blood. Hapi, the river god, humiliated, and watch what Pharaoh's court magicians do, because they matter more than you think. Their names, according to the Apostle Paul, writing centuries later, were Jannes and Jambres. And when Aaron struck the river, these 2 sorcerers stepped forward and somehow turned more water to blood themselves. A cheap trick, a small imitation, but it was enough. Pharaoh shrugged. My magicians can do that too. His heart, the text says, was caved, heavy, weighed down, immovable, like a stone that will not be rolled. And he walked back into a palace and refused to even think about it. 7 days later, the second blow, frogs. It sounds almost comic until you imagine it. They came up out of the bloody river in numbers no one could count, into the houses, into the beds, into the ovens and the kneading bowls, where bread was being made. You could not put your foot down without crushing one. You could not sleep without them crawling across your face. The whole land croaked through the night. Imagine lying in your own bed in the dark and feeling the cold, wet weight of them landing on your chest, your legs, your face. Imagine reaching into the bowl to make the morning bread and pulling out a fistful of frogs. Imagine your children screaming, and there being nowhere in the entire house, nowhere in the entire country to put them where the frogs are not. You cannot escape it. You cannot kill your way out of it, because there are always more. The sound alone would drive you to the edge of madness, an entire nation of frogs croaking all night for days. And here's what most people miss. The Egyptians had a goddess named Heqet, a goddess with the head of a frog, the goddess of fertility and childbirth, the one Egyptian mothers prayed to when they were in labor. The frog was sacred. You could not simply kill them. So God did not send a frog. He sent an ocean of them until the symbol of life became a plague of revulsion, until the people were begging to be rid of the very thing they had worshipped. Pharaoh cracked. For a moment, he called Moses and said, "Take them away, and I will let your people go." Moses prayed, and the frogs died. All of them, in a single day, piled in stinking heaps until the land reeked of rotten frogs. And the moment Pharaoh could breathe again, he broke his word. His heart went hard. Stay with me, because that becomes the rhythm of this whole war. A blow, a crack, a promise, and then the stone heart slamming shut again. Then the third blow. And this one is the hinge of the entire first act. Dust to gnats. Aaron struck the dust to the ground, and it became biting insects, swarming over every man and every animal in Egypt. Tiny, relentless, in your ears and your nose and your eyes, biting skin you cannot protect, because there are too many and they are too small to fight. And this time, Jannes and Jambres stepped forward to do their little imitation again, and they could not. They tried. They strained. Nothing happened. And these two hardened court sorcerers turned to the most powerful man in the world and said something they had no reason to say, something that cost them everything. This is the finger of God. You have to understand how big that moment was inside that throne room. These were not Hebrews. These were the elite priests of Egypt, the men whose entire careers, whose status, whose lives depended on defending Pharaoh and his gods. For them to break ranks and say out loud in front of the king that they were no longer watching their own magic but the hand of someone else's god. That was career suicide. That was treason against the religion of the state. And they said it anyway, because they had finally hit the wall of something they could not fake. In Hebrew, Etzba Elohim, the finger of God. The very men whose job was to defend Pharaoh's gods looked at the third plague and admitted out loud in the throne room that they were no longer watching magic. They were watching the hand of a real and living God. And Pharaoh heard them and hardened his heart anyway. Hold that phrase, the finger of God, because it comes back later in the most surprising way. Now, before we go on, I want to stop and ask you something directly. Have you ever watched someone refuse to change when every single sign in the universe is screaming at them to change? A friend, a parent, maybe a version of yourself you do not like to think about. That is Pharaoh. The plagues are not really a story about water and frogs and gnats. They are a story about a heart and what happens to a heart that keeps choosing the same dark thing one more time and one more time and one more time. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the history behind the verses, the parts your Sunday school skipped, take 1 second right now and subscribe. It genuinely is the one thing that tells these stories to more people. Then come right back because the blows are about to stop being annoyances and start being catastrophes. We are only 3 in, there are 7 to go, and the next one changes who gets hurt. Because up to now, the plagues had fallen on everyone, Egyptian and Hebrew alike. The 4th blow changed that. Flies. Dense, swarming, biting flies that filled the houses and ruined the ground. But this time God drew a line on the map. He said, in effect, watch what I do now. And the land of Goshen, where the Hebrew slaves lived, was untouched. Not one fly. While the rest of Egypt suffocated under a black cloud of insects, the slaves stood in clean air and watched. God made a distinction. That is the word the text uses. A separation, a difference, between the people who belonged to him and the people who did not. And from this plague forward, the slaves are spared every time, while Egypt burns. Imagine being an Egyptian standing at the border of Goshen, slapping flies off your own children, looking across an invisible line at Hebrew children playing in the sun, untouched. You would start to wonder. You would start to be afraid. And some of them did. And I want you to sit in that for a second, because this is the moment the story stops being about a contest and starts being about you. Up to now, you could tell yourself this was just one nation's bad luck, but the line through Goshen is God saying something terrifying and personal. There are 2 kinds of people in this story, and the only thing that decides which kind you are is whose side of the line you are standing on. You can be inside the storm or outside of it. And from this plague forward, that question, which side of the line, which side of the door, is the only question that will matter. The 5th blow fell on the cattle. A pestilence swept through the livestock of Egypt. The horses, the donkeys, the camels, the herds, the flocks. And they died in the fields. This was not just an economic disaster, though it was that. In the ancient world, your animals were your bank account, your tractor, your transportation, and your dinner all at once. To lose your herd was to lose everything you had built. Picture walking out at dawn to your fields and finding every animal you own lying dead in the grass overnight. No wound, no sickness. You could have stopped. Just gone. And knowing the family across the line in Goshen walked out to find their herds standing healthy, chewing in the sun. But it was worse than money. The Egyptians worshipped Hathor, the goddess pictured as a cow, and Apis, the sacred bull whose living body was thought to house a god. The cattle were not just wealth, they were divine. And God let them rot in the open while once again, not one animal belonging to the Hebrews so much as stumbled. The 6th blow was the first one that touched the body directly, and it carries a detail you should not miss. God told Moses to take handfuls of soot from a furnace, the very kind the slaves used to bake bricks, and throw it into the air in front of Pharaoh. The ash that came from the slaves' suffering rose up and became festering boils, breaking out in sores on every Egyptian and on their animals. Think about what that means for an ordinary person. You wake up and your skin is erupting. Open sores on your arms, your face, the soles of your feet, so that you cannot walk, cannot work, cannot sleep on your own body without pain. There is no medicine, there is no priest who can heal it, because the gods of healing are as silent as all the rest. You just hurt everywhere, with no end in sight. And here's the part nobody tells you. The magicians, Jannes and Jambres, the men who had stood beside the throne through every plague, could not even stand in front of Moses anymore, because they themselves were covered in oozing sores. The defenders of Pharaoh's gods were now too sick and too broken to enter the room. Remember the third plague when these same two men said, "This is the finger of God." They saw the truth with their own eyes back then. And they stayed anyway, kept serving the throne anyway, until the judgment they had named with their own mouths ate into their own skin. They simply vanish from the story here, undone by the very thing they could not imitate. There is a warning in that, and you already feel it. Knowing the truth is not the same as moving toward it. And still, Pharaoh's heart went hard. This is the seventh blow, and the tone of the whole story changes here, because for the first time, God warns Egypt and offers mercy in the same breath. Hail. A storm of hail like Egypt had never seen, mixed with fire that ran along the ground, heavy enough to kill anything left outside. But before it fell, God did something he hadn't done before. He sent a warning, plainly spoken. Bring your servants and your animals indoors, because everything left in the field will die. Stop and feel the weight of that warning, because it changes how you have to think about all of this. God did not have to warn anyone. He chose to. Before the deadliest storm in Egypt's history, he gave every single household a chance to get their people inside and live, which means the only Egyptians killed by the hail were the ones who heard the warning and did nothing. And the text records something quietly stunning. Some of Pharaoh's own officials, Egyptians, members of the court, feared the word of the Lord, and they ran and brought their servants and their livestock inside. Others laughed and left everything in the open. When the storm came, it shattered the trees, flattened the crops, killed every person and animal still outside. Picture standing in your doorway, watching ice the size of fists come down out of a black sky streaked with fire, hearing it tear through everything you own, and knowing you were told, you were warned, and you did not listen. The only place in all of Egypt where no hail fell was Goshen. Do you see what is happening? The line is no longer just between Egyptian and Hebrew. The line is now running straight through Egypt itself, between the Egyptians who were beginning to fear this God and the Egyptians who refused. The blows were not just punishing a nation. They were forcing every single person to decide which side of the door they wanted to be standing on. Hold that thought, because that door is about to become the most important object in the entire story. The eighth blow ate everything that was left. Locusts. So many that they darkened the ground, that the sky went black with their wings, that they covered every surface and devoured every green thing the hail had spared, every leaf, every blade, every fruit. Egypt, the breadbasket of the ancient world, the kingdom that fed nations through famine, was stripped down to bare dirt. You have to understand what a locust swarm does to people who depend on the land, because we have mostly forgotten that terror. You hear it before you see it. A low roar like wind, except the day is still. Then the horizon turns dark and the dark is moving. And within minutes, the air is so full of insects that you cannot see the sun, you cannot keep them out of your mouth and your eyes, and the sound of millions of mouths eating fills the whole world. And when they lift off again, hours later, there is nothing. No green thing anywhere. The field you spent a year growing is brown stubble. You are looking at famine, at your children going hungry through the winter, and you are powerless to stop a single one of them. And by now, even Pharaoh's own officials were begging him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go? Do you not yet realize that Egypt is destroyed? His own court, his own advisors, the men who served the living God were now telling him to his face that his stubbornness had ruined the most powerful empire on earth. And he would not listen." Let me stop here for just one moment because we are about to step into the final act, and I do not want you to miss what these 9 blows have actually accomplished. I want you to count them with me. Egypt's water, destroyed. Egypt's symbols of fertility and life, turned to plagues. Egypt's livestock, dead in the fields. Egypt's bodies, covered in sores. Egypt's sky, emptied of light and filled with fire and wings. Egypt's harvest, gone. One by one, every god they trusted had been called out into the open and shown to be powerless. There was only one God left standing, the one they could see, the one on the throne, Pharaoh himself. So the 9th blow went straight for him. If you have made it this far, you already know this story is bigger than the cartoon version you were handed as a child. So if you are still with me this deep into the night, comment one word below, just the word Egypt, so I know who made it to the dark part. It honestly helps more people find these. Now let me show you the dark part, literally. Darkness, not nightfall, not a cloud over the sun. The text says a darkness that could be felt, thick, total, suffocating, a blackness so complete that for 3 days no Egyptian could see his own hand or rise from where he sat. Try to feel what that would do to you. Close your eyes right now and imagine that when you open them, it makes no difference. 3 days of a blackness you can feel pressing against your skin like cold water. You cannot find the door. You cannot find your own children in the same room. You sit frozen where you are because to move is to fall. And you have no idea if this darkness will ever end or if the sun is simply gone forever. There is a particular kind of dread in the dark that lives under all our other fears. And God reached down and gave the whole nation 3 days of nothing else. And of all 10 blows, this is the one that struck at the highest god in the entire Egyptian religion. Ra, the sun god, the source of all light, the god from whom Pharaoh claimed to descend. Pharaoh was, in their belief, the living son of the sun, and God put the sun out. For 3 days, the most powerful empire on earth sat frozen in a darkness it could feel on its skin. And you already know what is coming. In the land of Goshen, the homes of the slaves had light. Picture that. An entire nation paralyzed in blackness, and across the border, the people they had crushed for 400 years sitting in the warm glow of their own lamps. The son of the sun could not produce a single ray of light. The slave's god had simply switched it off. Pharaoh, half mad in the dark, summoned Moses one last time and screamed at him to get out, to take his people and go, only leave the flocks behind. Moses said, "No, not one hoof stays." And Pharaoh, the god king of Egypt, sitting in a darkness he could not lift, said the words that sealed the 10th blow. Get out of my sight. The day you see my face again, you will die. And Moses said, You have spoken well. I will never see your face again. Now I have to slow down because what comes next is the most solemn moment in the entire Hebrew scriptures. And it is the moment that the very first sentence of this video has been pointing toward the whole time. 9 times God had struck Egypt and spared the firstborn. But Pharaoh had begun this whole story by murdering Hebrew sons, drowning baby boys in the river, trying to erase a generation. And now after 9 warnings, after 9 chances to repent, the final verdict came. At midnight, the Lord himself would pass through the land of Egypt, and every firstborn son would die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, the heir to the throne, the next living God, down to the firstborn of the lowest servant, down to the firstborn of the cattle, the nation that had been built on dead Hebrew children would, in a single night, lose its own. This is the blow that the finger of God was always pointing toward. Justice. Terrible, exact, measure for measure. You drowned my sons, says the God of the slaves. Now I will require yours. But here, right here, at the darkest hour of the entire story, God does something that no one expected. He provides a way out, and he provides it for everyone, Hebrew and Egyptian alike, because the door of escape was open to anyone who would believe. Do you remember the very first thing I told you to hold in your mind? Another kind of blood. Not blood poured out to judge, but blood smeared by hand in the dark on wood. This is it. God told every household to take a lamb, a perfect lamb without a single flaw. They were to kill it at twilight, and they were to take its blood, and with a bunch of hyssop, they were to paint that blood across the top of the door frame and down both sides, and then go inside and shut the door and not come out until morning. And God made a promise. When the judgment swept through Egypt at midnight, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. That is the Hebrew word Pesach, Passover, Yerkfa, and it does not just mean to skip. It means to cover, to protect, to stand guard over a threshold like a shield. I want you to notice how strange the instruction is. God does not say, prove you are worthy. He does not say, be brave or be good or fight. He says, kill a lamb, mark your door, get inside, and trust the blood to do what you cannot do for yourself. Your safety that night had nothing to do with how strong your arms were or how clean your record was. It hung entirely on whether you believed God enough to put the blood on the wood and stay behind it. That is it. That is the whole test. So picture it now. The most important night in the history of a nation. Across all of Egypt, in tens of thousands of Hebrew homes, families are crowded inside small dark rooms. The smell of roasted lamb in the air. Children pressing close. Every one of them staring at a wooden door painted with blood that is still wet and red in the lamplight. You are in one of those rooms. You are holding your own firstborn child against your chest. And you can hear, faintly, that the night outside has gone wrong. A sound is starting in the distance and getting closer. And the only thing between your child and that sound is a smear of blood on a piece of wood and the word of a God you have known for only a few weeks. Would you have stayed inside? Would you have trusted it? They are not safe because they are good. They are not safe because they are strong. They are not safe because they are Hebrew. They are safe for one reason, and one reason only. There is blood on the door, and death has been told to honor it. And I want you to feel what that night actually was, because we say the 10th plague so fast that it stays an idea instead of a horror. Have you ever sat up through a night not knowing if someone you love would live until morning? Have you ever waited by a phone or a hospital bed or a door, listening to the dark, your whole body clenched around a single question: is my child still breathing? That is the only way to understand this night. Because at midnight the cry began. It started in one house and spread to the next and the next until, the text says, there was not a single house in Egypt without someone dead in it. From the palace, where Pharaoh's own son lay still, to the prison, the wailing rose up over the whole land at once. Every parent who had laughed at the slave's God, every official who had refused to fear, every family that had no blood on the door, woke in the dark to find their oldest child gone. Do not rush past that, because it is meant to break your heart, not just frighten you. These were real families. The Egyptian mother who lost her firstborn that night loved that child exactly as much as the Hebrew mother loved hers. This is the most expensive thing God ever does in the entire Old Testament. And the Bible does not flinch from how much it cost. There is no cheering in this story. There's only a nation that had drowned other people's children for 400 years, finally meeting a justice it could not buy its way out of, and a single narrow door of mercy that every one of them could have walked through, if only they had believed. And in the Hebrew houses, behind the marked doors, the children were sleeping, breathing, alive, not because the angel of death did not come to their street. He came to every street. He passed every door. But where he saw the blood, he passed over. That, finally, is the war won. Pharaoh broken at last, his own son dead in his arms, sent for Moses in the middle of that screaming night, and said the words he had refused to say through 9 plagues. Go, take your people, take your flocks, and go. And before dawn the slaves walked out of Egypt, hundreds of thousands of them, free after 400 years, carrying the bones of their ancestors and the gold their masters pressed into their hands just to make them leave faster. Stand in that crowd for a moment before we close. You have been a slave your entire life. Your parents were slaves. Their parents were slaves. You were born knowing that your body belonged to someone else, that your sons could be taken from you, that there was no door out of this and there never would be. And now you are walking in the dark with your children half asleep on your shoulder and everything you own on your back. You are walking out the front gate of the only world you have ever known, and no one is stopping you. The whips are silent. The overseers are weeping in their houses. The greatest empire on earth is too broken to lift a hand. You keep waiting to wake up. You do not wake up. It is real. You are free, and it happened in a single night, behind a door painted with blood. The most powerful empire on earth had been brought to its knees, not by an army, but by a series of 10 precise blows aimed at 10 dead gods. and by the blood of a lamb on a wooden door. Now, before I give you the three things to take from all of this, I want to be honest with you about the history because it matters. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, recounts these plagues in detail and treats them as real events at the founding of his nation. And there is something else, stranger and worth knowing. There is an ancient Egyptian document called the Ippur Papyrus, written by an Egyptian, that describes a time of national catastrophe in lines that stop you cold. The river is blood. Plague is throughout the land. The slaves have taken the gold of their masters. Now, I want to be careful and fair here. Most scholars date that papyrus to a different period entirely and do not believe it describes the Exodus. It is not proof of anything, but it is a haunting thing to read. An Egyptian voice from the ancient world crying out about a nation undone. Blood in the river, death in the houses, slaves walking off with the gold. Make of it what you will. I only put it in front of you so you know this story did not float in from nowhere. And so that, when you decide what you think about these 10 nights, you are deciding with your eyes open. So here's what I want you to actually carry out of these 10 nights. 3 things. The first is simply true. Whether you believe it or not, the 10 plagues were never about frogs and flies and weather. They were 10 verdicts in perfect order against the 10 things Egypt trusted instead of God. The river, fertility, the soil, the herds, the body, the sky, the harvest, and finally the sun and the king himself. Every false god Egypt had was called out into the daylight, one at a time, and shown to be nothing. The whole story is a single sentence written in catastrophe. There is one God, and it is not the one on your throne. And before you decide, that has nothing to do with you. Ask yourself what you actually trust when the night gets dark. Your bank account, your own strength, your reputation, the version of yourself you show other people. Egypt trusted things that could not save it. The question this story puts to you is whether you are doing the same, and whether it will take 10 blows for you to find out. The second one is personal, and it is harder. The most frightening thing in this entire story is not the blood or the locusts or the darkness. It is a heart that will not change. Pharaoh saw the finger of God with his own eyes, heard his own sorcerers confess it, watched his own officials beg him to stop, and he hardened his heart one more time and one more time until there was nothing left to soften. And I have to be honest with you about something the text does that makes people uncomfortable. In the first few plagues, it says Pharaoh hardened his own heart. He chose it. But later in the story, it starts saying God hardened Pharaoh's heart. People stumble over that. And here's what it actually means. When you refuse the light long enough, the refusing stops being something you do and becomes something you are. The same sun that softens wax hardens clay. The same warnings that broke Pharaoh's officials and sent them running indoors only made Pharaoh harder, because he had already decided over and over who he was going to be. God did not force a good man to be evil. He let a man become fully what that man kept choosing. And you do this too, I do. In small ways, every single day, you see what you should do. You feel the pull to change, to forgive someone, to put down the thing that is destroying you, to come home to God, and you choose the stone heart one more time because it is familiar, because changing is frightening, because not yet feels safer than now. The plagues are a warning written in fire across the sky. A heart can only be told no so many times before the no becomes who you are. Do not wait for the 10th plague to feel the first one, and the third, this is the one I want to leave ringing in your ears, is about the blood on the door. Every Hebrew family that lived through that night lived for exactly one reason. Not their goodness, not their strength, not their bloodline. A lamb died in their place, and its blood stood between them and the judgment that was sweeping the land. Centuries later, on a hill outside Jerusalem, at the very season of Passover, the exact festival God invented on this night, another perfect, unblemished lamb would be lifted up on 2 beams of wood, and his blood would run down the wood the same way the lamb's blood ran down the door frames of Egypt. It is not an accident that they killed him at Passover. It is not an accident that not one of his bones was broken. Exactly like the Passover lamb, the whole Bible is whispering it from this night forward. And once you hear it, you cannot stop hearing it. There is blood on the door, and when God sees it, death passes over. So let me put the question to you the way the story puts it. You do not get to stand outside this. Every person in Egypt that night was either behind the blood or they were not. There was no third option, no neutral ground, no clever argument that kept death away. And the Bible says you are in the same position right now. The story that begins with blood in a river ends 2,000 years later with blood on a cross. And both of them are saying the same impossible, merciful thing to you. You do not have to be good enough to survive the night. You do not have to be strong enough, or clean enough, or brave enough. You have to be behind the blood. So let me ask you the question I really want you to answer in the comments. Of all 10 blows, the river, the frogs, the gnats, the flies, the cattle, the boils, the hail, the locusts, the darkness, and that final terrible night, which one hit you the hardest, and why? I read these. Tell me below. For 3,000 years, people have argued about whether these 10 nights really happened, and counted the plagues, and debated the dates. But they keep missing the smallest and largest thing in the whole account. In the end, the entire war between the greatest empire on earth and the God of a nation of slaves came down to this: whether or not there was blood on your door. There still is a door. There is still a night coming. And the question God asked Egypt is the exact question he is asking you right now, tonight, wherever you're sitting as you listen to this. It has never changed, and it never will. Are you behind the blood,